Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a massive geographic mystery. You've probably seen those population maps showing bright red clusters where millions of us are just jammed into tiny slivers of land along the coasts. But if you look at a satellite map of the US at night, there is this massive dark void right in the middle of the country. So today, we're figuring out exactly why huge chunks of America are essentially operating in ghost mode.
And to kick things off, get a load of this number, 50%. Even though we have a total national population of over 340 million people, nearly half of all U.S. census blocks have absolutely zero residents. Literally zero. We are talking about millions of acres where the only locals are trees, cattle, or maybe the occasional confused tourist. It's a staggering figure, right? And it really frames the sheer scale of what we're looking at here.
Because think about it, we're constantly told the world is overpopulated, that our cities are bursting at the seams, and finding a quiet spot to just breathe is nearly impossible. Yet, as the old saying goes, we all seem to be fighting for the exact same 3 square inches of sidewalk. We huddle together so tightly on the coasts, and we leave that massive, dark void in the middle of the continent completely untouched.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, the empty quarter. Second, the post-industrial ghost. Third, the suburban retail void. And finally, the off-grid revolution. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. The Empty Quarter, the Great Western Void.
So, if you've ever taken a cross-country flight from New York to San Francisco, you've spent a solid 4 hours just looking down at this massive expanse. We're talking about states like Wyoming, Montana, and the Dakotas. And to really put the sheer scale of this emptiness into perspective for you, Wyoming is geographically massive. It's the 10th largest state in the country. Yet its entire population is smaller than a single mid-sized California city like Fresno. Now, the easy answer people give is, well, it's just mountains and dirt. Who wants to live there? But as we'll see, the reality is way deeper than that.
This emptiness actually highlights a fundamental transition in our society. Historically, we lived exactly where the physical resources were. Back in the 1800s, if you had a plow and a dream, you moved west. You joined that extraction economy of mining and farming. But modern America? It's totally different. We've shifted to an attraction economy built on tech, finance, and entertainment. I mean, if you're a software engineer today, you're probably not moving to the Great Basin unless they have lightning-fast 5G connectivity and a decent latte, right?
But actually, scratch that, here's the new twist. Things are shifting all over again. Places right in the middle of this vast void, like Boise, Idaho, and Provo, Utah, are booming right now. Remote workers are actively fleeing those incredibly expensive coastal cities. And in doing so, they're taking what used to be considered severe, unwanted isolation and flipping it into a highly sought-after luxury. Empty space is literally becoming a premium product.
Which brings us to Part 2, the post-industrial ghost, abandonment in the East.
Now, it's not just the western deserts that are emptying out. You might logically expect the East Coast to be completely jam-packed from top to bottom. But let's look at Maine. It's actually the most forested state in the entire country. It used to be the absolute paper-making capital of the world, but when those mills closed down, the economic gravity of those towns vanished with them. Now the state is filled with abandoned paper mills and entire counties where the population has been steadily shrinking for decades. It's reverting back to a literal forest.
This specific kind of rural emptiness is driven by what demographers call a demographic pincer movement. See, when the young people leave these rural towns to find jobs in bigger cities like Portland or Boston, they don't just leave an empty house behind, they take the future birth rates of that town with them. So you have this brutal dual force. Birth rates are naturally dropping, and the outmigration of the youth is steady. The human engine of these areas is fundamentally, undeniably cooling down.
To really grasp just how widespread this cooling engine is across the map, check out the projections for 2026. In more than half of all U.S. counties, there are currently more people dying than being born. That is wild. America isn't just empty because it has a vast geography, it's actively becoming emptier because the fundamental demographic math in these rural and post-industrial areas is running in reverse.
All right, Part 3, the suburban retail void, the hole in our backyards.
So, this phenomenon isn't just restricted to the deep wilderness or old mill towns. I want you to think about your own town and your everyday surroundings for a second. Have you driven past a totally deserted suburban office park lately? Or maybe walked through a completely empty zombie mall that feels more like a post-apocalyptic movie set than a place to buy shoes? Yeah, this is a completely new kind of emptiness, and it is reshaping the exact places where the vast majority of us live.
The drivers for this localized emptiness are pretty clear.
Remote work is the new normal, and e-commerce is absolutely dominating how we shop. Because of that, the massive physical spaces we built for the 20th century, those giant office towers and sprawling shopping centers, are just being abandoned. It's creating these internal deserts right inside our communities. The result is this bizarre Swiss cheese effect in our cities. You might have a bustling high-end skyscraper on one block sitting right next to a literal commercial ruin on the very next block.
And that leads us to our final section, Part 4, the Off-Grid Revolution, the Future of Empty America.
So, what does this massive demographic and geographic shift actually mean for our future? Well, this expanding emptiness is very much a double-edged sword. On one hand, the environment is undeniably winning. Nature is actively stepping in and reclaiming land that was farmed for 200 years. But for the people who are left behind in these shrinking areas, the reality is really harsh. Their local tax bases crumble. I mean, it is incredibly hard to fix a pothole or fund a fire department when there are only 3 people living on the road. Consequently, we're seeing vital rural hospitals closing their doors and local schools being forced to consolidate just to survive. However, there is a totally fascinating counter-movement happening right now. Under the old reality, extreme isolation meant you were completely disconnected from the global economy. It was frightening. But look at the new reality. Thanks to the massive rise of satellite internet like Starlink and highly efficient solar power, living in a zero-person census block has completely transformed. It is now an attractive premium. For literally the first time in human history, you can sit out in the middle of nowhere and run a global business.
Ultimately, what we're seeing is that our map is fundamentally rewiring itself. We're no longer just continuously spreading out across the frontier like we used to. Instead, we're clumping. We are actively leaving the old industrial hubs and the deep rural plains, choosing to huddle together in dense supercities, all while quietly leaving the vast remaining stretches of the continent to the buffalo and the trees.
So I'll leave you with this final provocative thought to ponder today. As you look at this shifting map of where we choose to live, is this expanding emptiness a sign of a dying country losing its rural heartbeat, or is it simply nature taking its rightful place back? It's a massive geographic shift for sure, and one that's going to define how we live for decades to come. Thanks for joining me for this explainer today.